Hello, I'm Craig Griffin, and this is the Campaign for Real Qual, an exploration of how AI and research tech are reshaping the craft of qualitative research. And joining me today, we have Dave McCaughan. Dave has 40 years' experience of developing qual research projects across a dozen countries. While at McCann, he ran a program of weekly qual groups in 20 cities across Asia Pacific for over 13 years and has personally moderated over 1,000 focus groups. Dave now works on all kinds of projects helping brands find their story with his consultancy, Bibliosexual. Today, Dave and we're going to be discussing the recent IIEX APAC conference held in Bangkok just a couple of weeks ago. We'll share what we learned, what our key takeouts were, and we'll also discuss the paper that we actually co-presented, where we called for qual researchers to be more weird. Dave, welcome back. Great to have you back on the campaign. Looking forward to our chat.
Yeah, it's good that the campaign is rolling on, Craig, and that 2026 there's a sort of some new twists and turns happening that we can discuss today, and I'm sure you'll be discussing with other guests in the future.
Yeah, we've got lots more. After a break, we've got lots more content planned. Right, so let's jump straight in with the conference. Dave, tell me one or two. I know you've written a piece recently on LinkedIn, which I think many people read and many people said was really useful. So maybe you could share a couple of the key learnings that you took out that you think our audience might be most interested in from the conference.
Sure. Yeah, 2 days, 40 odd speakers, some good, some great, some not so good. That's always the way. You can't help that.
Always
right?
the way.
It's always the way. Look, the interesting thing for me is the IIEX conferences in the last few years tend to be a bit of over the top, too much AI. And this was good because it was a bit of a step back. There were still too many people talking about AI as if it was new or, hey, I've just developed my own AI platform. And you go, yeah, but it sounds like exactly like everybody else's AI platform.
Yeah.
The interesting thing for me was that in terms of, and remember the theme of IIEX conferences is insights innovation. And the innovation for me was in qual research, or more importantly, in research into re-looking at demographics. And so we saw some great presentations. Two friends of mine, Drago and Scott, have done really interesting work on a favorite theme of mine, looking at the over 60s. They've done it through one-on-one interviews, really in-depth one-on-one interviews with a bunch of people in Japan, and then subsequently in Singapore and Indonesia. And what was interesting was the way, not only what they did, but the way they presented it. Very, very professional, very slick presenters, but really integrated, really interesting filmed comments from some of these older Japanese people that they were highlighting, and the way in which they really caught on to the fact that these people in their 60s, me, for example, at Plus, are really entering a new contract in life, which is what they called their report. And that was really interesting. Two good friends of ours, Grant and Jerome, here in Bangkok, undertook a study off their own back we're pretty sure it was the first time anybody's done this. They actually looked at solos, and solos are people who are living alone and intend to live alone. So it's not, a lot of us when we were younger might have lived alone until we found the right partner, or, or we had to share a place with somebody else. These are people of all ages who've decided that solo living is for me. So they did a mix of quant and qual work. But what was really interesting to me was the fact that they dug deep into a demographic that, as soon as you say it, you go, oh, yeah, this is a big phenomenon in Asia, in America, around the world. But it's something that people are not, or market researchers haven't spent enough time looking at. And what they did really cleverly was they then invited one of their clients, Samsung, to come and follow up and do the next presentation, which was all about how Samsung is adapting some products and some of their ranges for solo livers. And so it was great to see a refocusing on demographics and innovative ways to understand innovative new demographics, or demographics that are understudied, if you like.
Yeah.
The other great thing for me, or most interesting thing, was Ram with the impossible name that I won't even pretend I can say. Ram is a really well-known market researcher. He now works as a professor at university in Singapore. But he did a great presentation about influencers. And what his presentation was about was not you should use influencers or you shouldn't use influencers. It was about, are you really rethinking the quality with which you use influencers? And I know from my own experience working in the advertising world for decades that we figured this out probably 30, 40 years ago, that there are certain rules about using celebrities. And let's face it, influencers are just, if you like, celebrities within very narrow channels.
Yeah.
And what he highlighted was the same basic rules that we've sort of known about, but it was the fact that qualitatively, it's not about the numbers. It's not about the fact that Craig has 5 million followers. It's about qualitatively, what kind of message does he deliver, and how are we integrating that message into everything else we're doing, but more importantly, how are we taking the message that Craig as an influencer delivers and using it qualitatively in the right way, in the right channels to get to people. And what I think that opened up was a really great discussion about the role of qualitative research in understanding what benefits an influencer can deliver and where they can deliver them. And what is it that, for example, I see a lot of research on numbers of followers, of numbers of people who, because Craig says buy this T-shirt, they go and buy the T-shirt. What I don't see enough is qualitative research about what influencers and what they're doing and how, the effect they have, and indeed qualitative research into the influencers themselves. You know, and I'd love to see more of that. But so it really sparked some ideas in my head.
Okay.
What about you, Craig? I know you got a lot out of it. So what were the highlights for you?
Yeah, I mean, I share what you said, you know, with re-looking at certain demographics. And I think this sort of continues for me from something I heard at SMR Congress in Prague. There was some discussion, I think, from a couple of papers around that. And I think this idea of going back to basics. So I think we've been pretty lazy in the industry for a long time, putting the same variables in our questionnaires. Oh, we put gender, age, and blah, 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 blah. And it's sort of, you know, we're almost on autopilot. And I think now we're starting to ask this question, you know, why are we putting them in there? That they're supposed to be things that predict differences in opinions or behavior. And there's one in particular in paper in Prague I remember, it might have been a discussion, but it was basically saying the old variables don't work as prediction tools, that we need, there's lots of new things that better predict. So I think actually SMR are doing some work in this area. So this was a continuation of that idea that, you know, I know you do a lot of work in the older age segment, and even the idea of saying that 50 plus is, you know, is just one group is ridiculous. You know, there's so much difference and nuance in that. And then, like you say, you know, this new demographic of solos. It's one of those where you watch it and it just makes so much sense, doesn't it? It's like, yeah, of course, we've probably heard about this for a while, but you know, never really thought about it too much. And yeah, this is something that now we've got hard data to show there's quite a lot of variance in this group and the way they respond to you know, to what we put out there. So I think I agree with that we need to rethink demographics and segmentation. There's lots of new ways we can look at people. So it's a kind of back to basics approach. Everything becomes AI, but actually there's innovation in going back to basics, which is asking the question, what makes us different as people? So That was the sort of first thing. The other thing was more in the AI space. So I think the conversation's changed a bit. I think if we went back a year or so ago, yeah, it was, hey, look at the shiny new toy, and this discussion around should we be using AI or not. I think the industry has accepted that AI is mainstream, that there's lots of benefits in using the people who are integrating into workflows. The conversation seems to have changed to, okay, but how should we use it? And in answering that question, what is it that's unique about humans? So I think we recognize now there's two types of intelligence. There's artificial intelligence and there's human intelligence. And the combination is very powerful. But to answer this question, how do we use AI? We have to ask this other question: what is still uniquely human? So there were quite a few papers on that topic, including ours, which we'll talk about later. And I think there was at least two other papers, maybe three, that were talking about this same topic. In our paper, we called humans' capacity for meaning making. There was another, Andrew from the lab, he called it sense making, which is another great word for describing what humans are very good at. And then there was another speaker that called it intuition. I think we were all broadly talking about the same thing, really. So I think this examination of, okay, what is it that still we're good at? And that in answering that, we can figure out the workflows with AI. So that was sort of, those were the two things for me.
I think that was really interesting. As I said earlier on, and as you said, if you go back the last 3 years since we had the sort of GPT arrival, every conference that you and I have attended, listened to, every report we read has been about, there's this new thing called AI, which of course is not true in itself, because AI has been around for decades. It's just there were some free platforms we got to play with. So that's great. But the problem has been that the industry I tend to think of the industry as getting lazy thinking sometimes. Like a new technology comes in and that's the end of the world. It's all different now and nothing will ever be the same and you can't ever do things the same. You use any old techniques. And we saw that with all sorts of technologies. We saw that. I always quote the fact that in the 1940s, there was a thing called focus groups invented. It was invented by this German-Austrian guy and a woman who then moved to America and entered the advertising world. They worked for my old agency, McCann, in the 1940s, and were the first people to use focus groups as we know them. So at that time, that was like shocking, right? And then we roll on, we've seen all these other tech. I think one of the things is that we're now seeing people coming to grips a bit more with the fact that, there's the technology of AI. Okay, we can use it for different reasons. And you sum it up really well when you say, look, it can speed things up and it can make things more efficient. And that's fantastic, right? But you created a term almost accidentally, I think, and you talked about the great flattener. And I've taken that up in the last couple of weeks, and I'm using that all the time now, which is basically goes back to the idea that everybody has access to AI tools. It's up to you how much you use them, whether you use them or not. But the truth is that using AI tools isn't something that's special. It's the flattener now. It's the baseline. And so what you and I talked about in our paper was take that for granted now. Now what? If AI is the flattener and we're all playing around with it, and you might be 10 times better at it than me, and you might be, have using platforms much better than the ones I use, but we're all using them. But then comes what? And that's what you and I talked about.
And I think this idea is sort of taking hold now. I mean, I called it the great flattener. We've been using that term. I think that's the second time we've used it when we've presented something. And just recently there was that MIT paper. They called it intellectual convergence. And it's the same idea, really, that if everyone uses these tools in a very similar way, then I ideas and thinking will get narrower and narrower and narrower, and
Yeah.
we'll all be saying the same thing.
By the way, folks, I just want to say that it's fantastic that, we stand up in front of an audience, about 300 people at a conference, and talk about this thing like the Great Flattener. And then literally the same week come across this MIT article that's talking about the same thing. And there's nothing about boosting your own ego than knowing you put onto an idea and then MIT has the same idea,
Yeah, and then this impulsive reaction. Well, I thought it first, yeah. Yeah, and it's we'll come on to our paper now, because it's there was another idea that we shared, and we'll come to this, and then literally a few days later, Mark Ritson wrote something similar, which he's obviously much more famous than we are, but we'll come to that. So I think we're on the right track, hopefully, with some of these ideas. I think this is a good point to turn to our paper. So just to let listeners know, Dave and I presented at the conference. We presented a paper called "Amplifying Your Original Voice in an AI-Driven World," and as Dave mentioned, we've argued that the focus has been very much on efficiency, bringing down the cost, increasing the speed, increasing the accessibility. And we wanted to ask a slightly different question: how can we use AI to make us better Qual researchers? So that was our paper. Now, there were 2 or 3 core ideas in the paper. Perhaps the strongest idea was yours, Dave, which was in 2026, you suggested that Qual researchers need to focus on being weird. Yeah. Can you explain why weird, why use that word, and what's behind that idea?
This started off as actually last year, in some of the sessions and some of the things you wrote for this campaign for Real Qual. You talked about weird as in the acronym that stands for Western, and the biases that are built into some of the platforms today about the sourcing of materials and stuff.
Yeah.
But that got me thinking about the word weird. And yes, it's weird that the platforms we're relying on, most of us don't realize that they are, in a sense, biased, right? But more importantly is, as we use those things, we have to be weird. And that follows on because for the last 2 years, I've been using this term original voice, which actually comes from the art world and is all about the fact that, you have to be unique. So every artist has to have an original voice, an original style, look, etc. So should every researcher. But if we're living in a world of the Great Flattener and we all have access to the same basic technological tools, what's going to make somebody want to pay Craig a fee to do a piece of work instead of anonymous X who's sitting somewhere we don't know where in the world, right? Who's going to pay Dave to present the findings of something, right? Rather than just getting a bot to do it. Well, the reason for that is our quirkiness, our strangeness, our uniqueness, our originality, our weirdness. And the example I used in the presentation was, Craig and I have been friends for many years now, and obviously we do papers together and all sorts of stuff. But the truth is, Craig and I personality is quite different. Our work styles are quite different. Craig, I would say, is one of the deeper thinkers that I know in the business, and I'm a bit of a lightweight when it comes to thinking. I'm the guy that flashes my underpants on stage to get attraction. Craig relies on coming up with really sensible, deeper arguments about things. But that's part of our weirdness. The problem, I think, is that in an AI-driven world where we have this great flattening of certain capabilities, to stand out, you've got to be a bit weird. And so hashtag be weird has become a thing. Fortunately, since the conference, a couple of other people have asked me about it. There's an article coming out on Green Book's blog in 2 weeks' time about it, et cetera, et cetera. There'll be a lot more stuff coming up. Maybe you won't be using the term be weird, but the uniqueness of not just how you present, but the uniqueness of how you use the tools.
Yeah.
The uniqueness of how you combine tools with traditional methodologies. One of the great examples that I love that you pointed out was that you're a trained anthropologist by academic education, right? And there are certain anthropological systems that you use in your everyday work as a Qual researcher. There will be other people who have a more, I don't know, semiotics background or other backgrounds. But as you said, one of the great things that about the availability of some of these amazing tools today is that, yeah, you can do an analysis using your traditional methodologies, but then you can ask the platform, well, if you were a semiotician, how would you interpret all this? Or if you were X, Y, and Z, how would you? Now, they may not be great interpretations and they'll get better over time. But that itself, when you said that to me, I went, see, that's being weird straight away, because 50% of the people in any audience of Qual researchers around the world would go, oh, but you can't rely upon a machine to do different interpretations based on these theological practices or something, right? But that is weird. It's a different approach. It's something that makes people go, oh, really? You've done that? Well, that could result in a very different type of output or a different way of doing the output. And this is why I think the being weird thing, or to be weird, as I keep on saying, will be the word of the year for 2026. And I hope all the dictionaries around the world pay me for that, so.
Well, maybe it's a new consulting arm, helping people to be weird. Maybe that will be the demand, for this year from researchers. Because I think, again, if I was to reflect on our industry, we're not always great at kind of marketing ourselves or personal branding and everything. So I think this is a call out to that.
And I think that's where this came from. Was my frustration over 4 decades in the market research world, that most market researchers are pretty appalling at the thing they're supposed to advise clients on. They're pretty appalling at looking at the information and coming up with advice on how you present your brand better to get to react to what matters to people. Yeah. And yet, if you ask, as I've done now in multiple conferences, when I ask, do a simple exercise and say to an audience of market researchers, do you ever actually study your own reputation? What? Do you ever ask platforms why you're an unusual or a different or a unique researcher? What? Why would I do that? Well, that's the great failing of us as market researchers. We don't think differently enough.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think I like the weird idea. It's clever because it just flips. Everyone, I'd say most people listening would have heard about AI's weird bias. I think that's got into mainstream now. And then just flipping that and saying, yes, be weird, I think is really clever, because it just turns that around and saying, okay, if AI is taking us in one direction, which is towards the flattening, then you need to go in the opposite direction and kind of be more weird. So yeah, it's very clever. Yeah. Maybe I'll share a couple of things that I talked about in the in the paper as well. So the first, I've been thinking a lot about this idea about the democratization of expertise. So I think this is one of the great things about AI. It makes expertise available to anyone, any kind of a theory or whatever. You can now use sort of in your work. So this is what you were just mentioning, Dave, that I think this idea that, okay, my interest is like social anthropology and culture. So now, when I'm doing some qualitative analysis, I can change the lens on. So I like to use the metaphor of like a camera lens, just change the lens on how we're looking at the data. So because I've studied this area, I can think of, okay, it would be quite good to use this lens for this piece of research. It might throw up something interesting. So instead of the first idea really I shared was, instead of just using AI to think faster, I mean, yes, use it, you can use it to to think faster, but also use it to think wider as well. Don't just, cut down your analysis times unless there's a project that really, really needs that, but use that time to think wider by changing lens. And we've whether we know it or not, we're all using lens. We're either just aware of the lens we're using or we're not aware. So I think
Sure.
this idea to change lens, and I know we've got our friend Sue Bell. She uses liminality a lot in her work. We know people like Ashok that look at work through a behavioral science lens. So, and this again this is how it links to your idea. You choose what your focus is, and then you can dial that up times 100 to really focus on that. So that was the first idea, using AI to think wider, not just faster, by looking at through a lot of different lenses. And then the second idea I thought about was, how can we use AI to influence, have more influence downstream and upstream of a project? So if you think of a typical project cycle, starts with a brief, ends with reporting, that would be a standard project. How can we use AI in a way to actually do, as I say, have more influence downstream and upstream? So if we start with upstream, often we're given something to test. Often we're not the ones that are developing the ideas or the stimulus that is tested. But I've thought for a long time now, we're in quite a good place to actually take ownership of stimulus development. I think we understand better than anyone how visuals and language work together to land in context. And I think what AI has done as well is making the creative work of stimulus development, even brainstorming the ideas, brainstorming concepts, turning those into visuals that you would use to test. All that kind of work now is much more accessible for non-creative, non-techie people. So, and then also, I think one thing that sometimes we used to do, probably still are doing, we would go in, we'd have some focus groups on day one. The creators would be there watching and go, okay, we need to rush off, and they'd be working all night to fix something. And then,
I was just thinking, my many years working in big advertising agency, and the number of times I'd have to drag a very unwilling art director to focus groups. And he'd basically, throughout most of the group, literally sit in the back of the observation room falling asleep, or something worse. And then suddenly 10 minutes before the end, it'd be, okay, Barry, we've got the next group's in an hour. We need to change these boards to do this, this, and this. And the poor sucker, in the hour, but when the rest of us are having a cup of coffee and talking about things, there's this poor guy sweating over boards, trying to redraw things or, redo packaging and stuff. And then having to tell the client, and this is actually costing us a lot of money because that guy's time is really expensive, And of course, now we can get around a lot of that. I think you make you made a really good point on the day. You make a really good point about the efficiencies of not just the secretarial part of our jobs. It's not just the efficiencies of, well, we can get it automatically transcribed, et cetera, right? It's the efficiencies of allowing us to think, if we're going to do focus groups or one-on-ones, or we're going to do the Qual at scale, or we're going to do semiotics, how can you use these tools to do it differently, right? And to offer more options, for example, or speedily change it as we're moving along. We probably all of your audience have done focus groups where you actually got people in the group to actually shuffle pictures around and cut out pictures out of magazines to make montages and stuff like this. Well, now we can get them to do it. And, it's amazing the number of people that are quite capable of doing this on a screen very quickly now, right? And coming up with these amazing sort of like, okay, I can't explain it, but let me show you a picture of what I mean, It's fantastic.
So I think there's a lot we can do in that area, which I think could add a lot of value to clients. And the second part of that was downstream. So the idea of extending your influence by focusing more on how insights are embedded into organizations and taking that into strategic planning, scenario building, business strategy. I mean, I think the industry has always tried to extend its influence, its influence, but I think now we're in a position where that's possible, and I think there is a shift happening, and I've read about this from two or three different writers of moving more towards sort of end-to-end processes. So this idea that um, this idea that one person can do more now because of AI and the ability to use it to do more and to use the expertise of AI to do more of a process. And so, I mean, I think that's the other idea. And literally about a few days after the conference, I mentioned Mark Ritson earlier. I think you probably saw the piece as well. He wrote a piece on how marketers should become generalists. That people were not moving jobs anymore because it was, marketers were afraid that they weren't be able to get another job. And his advice was basically, be the person that knows how to use AI well, and take on a much broader role within the marketing sphere. Don't be a specialist in that niche, but work across more of the marketing cycle. So I think in our own way, even though what I was saying, what he was saying, is quite different, we were both sharing the same idea, which was, okay, we've got access, we can use AI to actually upskill, do more of an end-to-end process, and that is going to add more value. So I thought that was interesting that he'd written about that, and that was sort of similar to what I was saying.
It's great to have reinforcement from more famous people than us.
Exactly.
And I think that's. But here's the thing. We messaged each other, or we talked briefly a couple of days ago about doing this podcast. And afterwards, you mentioned the Ritson thing, and I'd already read that. But then it got me thinking again, too, about, look, here's the thing, traditionally, market researchers have taken a brief, done a piece of research, presented the results of the piece of research. But now we have basically, beyond what we had with introduction to the internet, now we have the capability to use tools to go. So the question is, should Craig have pot plants sitting behind his shoulder when he does these interviews, right? And the beauty of it now is that through all these platforms, we can find literally hundreds of references, thousands of references to any problem, and do very quick, what used to be called secondary or desk research, right? Which my old pain, I always believe that's primary research, because that's what you should do first, right?
Yeah.
And my point is being that we've tended to do, okay, the client asked us about this, so we've done this. We now have the capability of looking much broader across a whole range of sources to find out, well, is that an issue? What is the real background that we should be looking at? And before we even get to talking to real people about it, before we even start, do we do a questionnaire? Do we moderate a focus group? Whatever. So those capabilities mean that if you're not doing that, that's the great flattener again, right? In my mind, most market researchers have been a bit lazy. They haven't done near enough secondary or desk research. And so we're now capable of doing that. If you're not doing that, then you're not being weird, right? Because you should be able to use all those tools to find out answers. It's no longer a day of saying, I asked 1,000 people and 72% said this. That's not an insight. It never has been an insight. It's never been even useful data in a lot of ways. It's just the answer to a survey. What you need to do is to use the capabilities of the AI world to do all sorts of work, qualitative work in different ways, to then get to a different sort of answer and stand out because your answer is a different sort of answer.
Yeah. And I think that's a really nice kind of way to wrap up. So I think we're pretty much out of time.
Yeah.
So I think our key message here is for everyone to be brave and be a bit more weird in how approaching work. Any final thoughts, Dave, on?
There's the three hashtags that came out of all this discussion were the idea of the hashtag rate flattener, right? The hashtag be weird and the hashtag different or dead. And the truth is that our industry will be dead if we don't do things differently. And as individuals, as companies, as personal brands, as just self-employed, individuals like you and I are, will be dead if we don't do things differently. And that's going to be the great thing for this year. The platforms are there. There'll be some advances in different platforms and twists and turns, but we should all know about all that now and be tracking that. Now it's about, well, how different, how weird are you?
Yeah. Okay, that's a great way to end. So thanks very much, Dave, for joining once again. It's been a really interesting chat, and we'll wrap up there. So signing off from the campaign for Real Qual. Lots more coming up soon, and hopefully we'll have you back, Dave, again sometime in the near future. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks, mate.
Okay.
Talk to you soon.